Well, thank you for joining us again for another interview. I think this is number 4, give or take. Our special guest today is Christina Riehn, and what I'm particularly excited about is half of the church has never heard you talk. So there's a first time for everything.
That could be true.
Let's deal with the elephant in the room. What's it like being married to Richard?
Well, I learned to become a very good listener. And what's funny is when we first met, he was still a talker. But when we were dating, he used to tell me funny stories. And he would tell me he can recite Alice's Restaurant by Godfrey, whatever his name is. He can recite the whole thing, and so he used to recite that to me when we were dating, and it was hilarious. And so most people probably don't realize I love jokes, and I think a lot of things are funny, and I like to laugh.
I don't think you would still be married to Richard if you didn't have a sense of humor.
That's true.
But seriously, that was one of the reasons why you are on the top of the list of people I wanted to interview, because if the two of you are in the room, people see Richard and they don't always get to see you. And one of the things I've enjoyed in the last few years is in Bible classes sometimes when he's out of town.
Yes.
You have some really cool things to say. And I wanted the church just to get to know you a little bit better.
Okay.
Has that ever been difficult, though, dealing with that dynamic being different between the two of you?
Yes, I have had to learn, and a lot recently, of being more assertive. What's funny, what you don't know about me, is in business, in the employment realm, I'm very assertive, very outspoken, and tell people what I think and take the initiative and all of that. But when in a personal setting, I'm more the person that will sit back and listen and observe. And yes, and Richard has taken advantage of that and the fact that he just comes on right out there.
So how have you learned that? What has that been like for you to be more assertive?
It can be frustrating.
Yeah.
Because it's uncomfortable for me at times to put that out there, to put my opinions out there, because I think of myself as someone that's not very interesting, and I have nothing really, outstanding to say or what have you. And so I like to listen to other people's stories and things like that, and it makes me uncomfortable to be the person in the forefront.
So you're thrilled about this right now?
Yes. I have to give kudos to Kathy, because if I hadn't have seen her video, and I would have probably not be agreeing to do this.
Well, thank you for doing it. I do think it's neat and important to get to see people. The thing that I don't like about the online service, the thing that I don't like the most is I'm a little bit afraid it comes across like the Matthew show, because, here's my face for half an hour. And I don't want it to be that, because the church I'm just the loudmouth, and if all you have is a loudmouth, nothing gets done. It's the Jerry Halls who make communion with Mary week after week after week. It's Kathy's who make Wednesday night meals happen. I suspect when all's said and done, more good has happened in this church because of Kathy's cooking than my preaching. Everybody has a role to play. So let's go back a little bit. Tell me a little of your story. Where did you grow up? How did you end up here?
I grew up in Maryland, spent 18 years in the same place, a little town called Boonesboro. A lot of people know where Frederick and Hagerstown is, and Boonesboro's right in the middle. And
I'm 0 for 3 on those towns.
Oh, you don't know any of them?
No.
I'm surprised. A lot of people know where Frederick, Maryland is.
Okay.
And so it's a small town that we grew up. I was able to run the fields. I grew up between 3 huge dairy farms, although we weren't on a dairy farm. So we could run the fields, and down by I grew up at Antietam Creek, which you might know from the Civil War.
I have heard that one.
And, we would play down there as kids that I look back on now, and I thought we could have drowned and nobody had known it for 3 days. But we were allowed to go out and play and be back when it was dark, and so it allowed us a lot of freedom. One thing about my story is I did not grow up in the church, but I have always known for some reason that there was a God. I can remember running through the fields, and I just knew by looking at nature that there was something bigger. And I knew it was God, but my family was not church going. Although they did believe in God, they didn't really do a lot about it. Now, they were baptized, but we didn't go to church, even though there was a 100-year-old church right across the street from us. So when I read in the Bible about, God says, you will know me by nature, I believe that.
Yeah.
Because, and I had to think back on that. I thought, where did that come from? And I can't have any explanation except for the fact that he was there. He sought me out.
I read somewhere that we born believe and we have to learn unbelief.
Not to. I've read that too.
I don't know if it's true, but I think
I agree.
It holds true, I think.
Yes.
So what's the story then of how you came to kind of, you had the idea that there is a God in some form or fashion. How did you get from there to Christianity? How'd you get in?
How'd I get in? My mother evidently wasn't baptized. My dad was baptized as a child in some Brethren church or something like that. My mother, the church across the street didn't have a minister, and so they brought somebody from Virginia over an hour away, Lee and Fran Avery's, to be the ministers up there, or minister. And so my mother waltzed me and her across the street, and we went to church there for a while, and he counseled us and what have you, and she decided we needed to be baptized. So I was 12. They waltzed me off to another church in Virginia to get baptized, because this church didn't have a Baptist. And I really have to say that I understood some of it, but I didn't really understand what I was doing. And for many years, I thought, this didn't take it, but that's not true as far as I believe. Some people would say, oh yeah, you still need to be baptized, rebaptized or what have you, but over the years, I've had things come up to where for a while I did not walk away, but I struggled a lot, and I was angry with Jesus. And then I came back to East Texas, and there was a minister there by the name of Eddie Messer that kind of like I think of you. He was really good at presenting things in a different way, deeper and what have you. And so I gave my life back and have never turned back since then. And I struggled for a while as to whether I should be rebaptized. And I think, no, it's always been there. This is where it's at. And I've always believed, and I just don't think it's necessary. But it was, I came into Christianity just because I was following my mother.
Yeah.
And I credit Lee and Fran Avery's for being dedicated enough to make that hour or 2 hour trip from Virginia up to Boonesboro to be ministers there at that church.
Wow, that is really cool. And I believe with you, I agree with you. When people come to me and ask about, did I know enough? My answer might be too simple, but I always ask, did you have a mustard seed of faith? I mean, did you have this much faith? I'm not saying this much or this much or this much, but if Jesus said this much could move mountains, I tend to think that this much, God can use that. And so yes. I don't second guess a lot of baptisms because I think God knows what he's doing when he said those things. I think you'd be surprised how many people have that story in common with you. And even a little bit of what you heard with Kathy last week, kind of questioning some of those things for her. I don't know. I thought that was neat to hear how that planned out. So you mentioned your jobs in the corporate world. What all have you done there?
I've been somewhat like a telephone operator for a service company. We've been house parents at the Christian Home and Bible School for teenage boys. We had anywhere from 5 teenage boys to 10. And so for a while we did have 10, and so I had 13 children I was responsible for. We did that for 3 years. We went to California, got into the banking industry, and that's where I was for 20-some years. And in mortgage lending, I did operations, and then I did mortgage lending. I've done commercial lending, everything but car loans. I really didn't care for car loans, but it was a stressful time of my life, but I also learned a tremendous amount, and I liked it. I was all into making sure people had homes to live in. I think that is a rock of our society here in the United States.
Yeah. So you said you were assertive in your careers, and I knew about the banking thing, and I could kind of picture that. But I confess, I'm having a hard time picturing you with 13 teenage boys.
Oh, yeah. I was young and idealistic, and we were really quite poor during that time because we had a business back in Texas that the oil crisis saw to it that it went under. And so to get a job, my husband had to go to Florida, and so we eventually went to Florida, and that's where Christian Home Bible School is. And we had some members of the church just asked us if we knew about that, and we said no. I always wanted to foster children, and so we just felt like that would be a good time. Went up there and didn't know what we were getting into. These are children that don't always come from a good background, and it had its own kinds of stresses, but it also taught me a lot. And it was very interesting. Not too long ago, on our little cross-country trip, we went back to Christian Home Bible School and kind of drove through the campus and what have you, and it was very interesting to see where they've come after all these years.
So do you have any stories from those years that you can tell?
Well, we have good and bad stories, but yeah, when I look back over it, I thought I could probably do that job better today than I could then, because that was 1987 and 88 and 89, and so I thought, man, I was really young to be taking on something like that, but hopefully we didn't mess those kids up too bad.
I'm sure they're fine. I'm sure none of them are talking to a therapist about you right now. You're probably good. That's a really neat ministry, and I'm grateful. I didn't know that, so this has already been worth the price of admission to me. So we were talking before the interview a little bit. Sometimes I ask about a person who has made a difference in your life. Do you have anybody like that? You've mentioned a couple already, but
in business-wise, I've had a few women that were very instrumental. But privately, I would have to say personally, I would have to say one of the people that has made the biggest difference, and she probably wouldn't know this, would be Harriet. Harriet has such a easy way about her. And from the first time I met her, I felt safe with her. And she just tends to do her hospitality and what have you from such and she probably has been doing it all her life, but she's so easy about it. Because I observe people and I watch her, and she's so unassuming and so friendly, and
it just is what it is.
It is. It's hard to describe what it is, but for someone like me, I felt safe with her, and she is a better friend to me than I am to her. But she is just way up there on my scale of people.
She has more heaven points than anyone I know.
Yes.
So hopefully she doesn't watch this, or we might both get ourselves into trouble. I can just kind of see her tisking and shaking her head,
Yeah.
But she sure is special.
Yes.
I bet a lot of people don't know the story of when y'all first came to Burns and ended up living in their basement for a while. Do you want to tell that story?
We were with EEM, and so we were visiting this church, and it was on a Wednesday evening, and they just had an elders meeting or something like that. And so we walked in, and of course, some of the first people we met were the brunettes, but James and Harriet, and of course, Richard's off telling everybody our life story over here. and I met Harriet. And so as soon as James found out that, we had a cat and we were going to house sit for somebody, and we had a cat, and that guy was extremely allergic to cats, so we couldn't house sit. And James was like, well, we have a cat, and we're going out of town, for 6 weeks. Can you come sit for us? And I mean, Richard had just met James 5 minutes before that, and he was already inviting us to come stay at their house, so we did.
So I asked you
and
that.
that's how we got that.
That was my memory of the story. And in my memory, I was standing outside the door of the Bible class where we have our classes on Wednesday, and y'all were standing at the end of the hallway, kind of by the staircase and that air vent there. And I remembered hearing James invite you to stay in his house. And I remember thinking, they haven't known each other 10 minutes.
And that's the way they've always been. And that's the way, Harry was like, yeah, sure, that's great. I was like, I can't believe you're going to let us do this.
That's what I love about them. And that's what I love about you guys, because not a lot of people would have said yes. And, you went on this adventure with them that was mutually advantageous, I feel like I should say.
Yes.
Because you were able to help the Hinkles take care of the house, take care of the cat, take care of a lot of things. And I know you said that Harriet is the friend, but your family has done so much. The men's breakfast, what do we call the old men who go to get donuts? And I just call them old men.
The old men that go eat donuts. Yeah.
I don't know, that's just a special corner of fellowship with Jim and Richard and James, and I don't know who else goes with them occasionally.
Those three have been the rock. Sometimes Dennis showed up for a while, and then
he's since fallen away.
Yes, and so there's been people that's come and gone, but those three are the foundation of the donut run.
So when y'all got here and met James, and 30 seconds later he invited you to live in his house, and no one ended up murdered. Yeah. Where were you living prior to that?
We were living down on the Piney River in an RV, and it would flood on a regular basis, usually about January to February, so it was also very cold outside. And our house in Texas had not sold, and so we were living there, and it was getting old, as you would get up at, the river would flood at whatever hour it wanted to flood, and most of the time it was at nighttime, and so kind of like a tornado, you had to get up and get out. And so we would quickly pack the RV to where everything was stable, and they would pull us out of the spot up to his barn that had electricity, and that's where we would spend a day or two until the river went back down. There was one time in February that Richard was standing in calf deep water. It was like 30 degrees outside, and they were pulling us out with this big tractor or what have you. And the cat and I rode on the inside of the RV up the road. You had to go up there and turn around and come back. So that was kind of interesting. And I was wondering, I can't believe that we got that close. But, there was like 10 or 12 of us down there by the river, and so it took them a while sometimes to get everybody out.
Yeah. I imagine that was an adventure.
Yes.
What did you learn about living in an RV for all that time? Because
you did really
it for
small.
2 years, right? 18 months, 2 years? How much?
21 months.
21 months, 3 days, 6 minutes. Not that anyone counted.
Yes.
But what lessons about life did that teach you, living in that small of a space for that?
That you really don't need as much as you think you do. I came from a good-sized house, 2,500 square feet and what have you, down to this 200 square feet. You really can do with a lot less clothes, a lot less everything. You learn to have a lot more patience because you can't get away from each other too quickly. And that's about all I can think of, except...
Oh, man. Still, that's amazing that no one ended up murdered.
Yeah. I could have drowned him in the river.
I feel like we're being mean to Richard today. I feel a little bit guilty because I hope Richard knows we like him. Yeah, he can take it. He'll be all right. We'll just take
Some of it he brings on himself. So, but I would have to say that we pick on Richard a lot. But I always like to tell people that when I had cancer, I saw a side of my husband that I had never seen before. And those are some of my fondest memories. He was, we typically have the old-time relationship, where I do a lot of the cooking and, and he does his little man things and what have you, but, he's taken care of. But there it flipped, and he took extremely good care of me. And because of his personality, he was the type that made me laugh all the time through sometimes horrendous things. And it went on for 2 years or more. But he would find some of the worst things and some of the most mundane things so funny, and then he would get me to laughing, and you would forget about everything that we were going through at the time. And so I have, that's always a fond memory for me. And I told all the kids, I said, your dad took such good care of me during that time.
That's a gift.
Yes,
that's a real gift.
Because I met some people that their spouses just couldn't do that, or they were more upset about what was going on. And Richard always had this upbeat attitude that everything was going to be fine. And I did also, but he found things to be funny, which lightened the mood a lot.
Absolutely. Well, I won't ask a whole lot more. You have shared so much, and I've loved our time together. Do you have anything that you just like to say to the church?
This is a very special place. I know that people say that all the time, but as I was talking to our film crew here, when we visited here, what made us decide to live here was the Burns Church. And just not James and Harriet, but everyone that we had met during that time. We could have chose to live anywhere in Middle Tennessee, and we decided to move here because of this church. Also, you would like to know that before we moved here, we were going to always travel when we retired, and we were just going to travel for quite a long time. Well, now that you're preaching here, I've told Richard, I said, we can't do that. I'm going to miss too many of Matthew's sermons and his teaching. And I said, we can't do that. We're going to have to change our retirement plans.
I know the truth. Richard can't get that far from Dixon Donuts. That's the real truth right here.
Well, that may be true also.
Well, I'm just grateful that you found us and we found you. I'm grateful that you guys are part of the family here.
Thank you.
You have had a neat experience in your life with where you've lived in all these different states and all these different careers, and even what you guys have done together with Eastern European Mission. I suspect you have visited more churches in the last year than most people do in a lifetime.
Yes.
Did you learn anything from that you'd like to share?
Yes, in the fact that, again, Burns has something special, because when you're visiting so many churches, there's churches you walk into that you can tell are dying, that they're not dying, but they're kind of cold. There's other churches you walk into, you can tell they really have things going on, and they're warm and friendly. But when you come to some place like Burns, for the size that we are, it's really the minister, you and James and the elders and what have you, have done a very good job with this congregation in telling them what is important.
Well, this congregation has done a good job with us, and I think
there's a lot of neat people here.
The Church of Burns makes it clear what's important, and that's super helpful.
Yes.
I love that we have a church of Richards and Joannes and Keiths, and the personalities that we can pick out and love each other. And I know that there's 100 people in this room that if I got arrested, I could call, and they would show up at the jail before they asked, "What'd you do?" Because there's just that sense of connection and camaraderie. I'm really glad you're part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you for tolerating this time. Would it be all right if we pray together?
Yes.
Okay. Father, thank you for Christina and for her story that you have led her through. Thank you for our time together today, and thank you for her good family. Thank you for the church at Burns and for blessing us to be part of it. And I pray that you will help us be the church that you want us to be each and every day. Through Jesus we pray. Amen.